Today we're looking at a British man arrested for a vacation photo, a shocking admission about London's vanishing majority, a wave of cable thefts crippling Europe's green revolution, thousands of passenger jets grounded by solar radiation, and an American president closing airspace over a country he doesn't control. And the most fascinating connection between all of these? I've saved that for the very end. I spent years inside one of the mainstream media giants, watching editors massage facts to fit the narrative, watching stories get buried because they made the wrong people uncomfortable. Eventually, I had to choose between my career and my conscience, so I walked away. Now I work independently from Europe, answerable to no one except you, the people who actually want the truth. And what I've learned is this: the stories that matter most are usually the ones the establishment hopes you'll ignore. Before we dive in, I need to ask something. If you value independent journalism that doesn't bend to corporate pressure or political fashion, hit that like button and subscribe. We spend hours fact-checking every claim, cross-referencing sources, making sure what you hear isn't just recycled propaganda. That takes resources. If you can support this channel financially, even a small monthly amount, it means we can keep doing this work without compromise. And trust me, stick around until the end of this episode, because what I'm about to show you about how all these stories connect will completely change how you see the news. Now let's get into it. John Richelieu Booth is an IT consultant from West Yorkshire. Ordinary guy, ordinary life, took a vacation to Florida. While he was there, he visited a private ranch, perfectly legal, and did what millions of Americans do every day. He picked up a shotgun and took a photograph. Then he made what British authorities apparently consider a catastrophic mistake. He posted it on LinkedIn. Not some dark web forum, not an extremist chat room, LinkedIn, the business networking site where people share job updates and professional milestones. A few days after he returned home, 6 police officers knocked on his door. They arrested him on suspicion of, and I'm quoting here, intending to cause fear of violence. They also connected his case to a photograph of an ordinary residential house he'd posted on social media, labeling it possible stalking behavior. He spent a night in a cell, endured interrogation, signed bail papers. Then they came back, arrested him again for allegedly violating bail conditions. This went on for 13 weeks. 13 weeks of his life consumed by a legal nightmare over a photograph that was completely lawful in the jurisdiction where it was taken. Eventually, quietly, the Crown Prosecution Service admitted there was no criminal offense, no charges, no trial, just oops, our mistake, you're free to go. But here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. In modern Britain, is one awkward photograph enough to turn your existence into a personal Orwell novel? Because what happened to John Richelieu Booth suggests the answer might be yes. And if you think this is just about one guy's bad luck, wait until you hear what's happening to entire populations. While one man was fighting for his freedom over a photo, across London a different kind of transformation has been unfolding, one that's rewriting the very definition of what it means to be British. Writer and Telegraph columnist Sean Thomas dropped a statistical bomb that most mainstream outlets would rather ignore. In 1975, white British people made up roughly 85% of London's population. According to the most recent census, that figure has collapsed to 36.8%, with the broader white category sitting at 53.8%. And the trend isn't slowing, it's accelerating. Thomas makes a comparison that will make a lot of people extremely uncomfortable. He references Phnom Penh under the Khmer Rouge, where the original population was systematically cleared out and replaced with new inhabitants. His point? In London, during peacetime, something has happened that nobody actually voted for. The official statistics back him up in ways that are genuinely startling. In 1961, non-white minorities in the city represented about 2 to 3% of the population. By 1991, around 20%. By 2021, over 46%. Among children, the white proportion is even lower, hovering around 42%. Now, the city still functions. The tube runs, offices are full, cafes are packed. This isn't about whether London works as a city, it's about something deeper. Millions of British people are being forced to confront a fundamental question. What does it mean to be a Londoner now, and who gets to define the character of this city? But here's where it gets really interesting, because one of Britain's loudest voices has an answer that's going to infuriate half the country. Piers Morgan, love him or hate him, never shies away from controversy. In a heated exchange with Tucker Carlson, he essentially shrugged at the demographic transformation. Carlson pointed to projections suggesting white British people could become a minority by the end of the century, citing 2063 as a possible tipping point based on demographic models. Morgan's response? So what? He argued that migration has brought Britain enormous benefits, including cuisine that transformed London from a post-war culinary wasteland into one of the world's gastronomic capitals. The quote that went viral, that lit up social media like a powder keg, was Morgan saying he'd gladly trade some white English people for good Indian curry. His critics ripped it out of context, holding it up as proof of gleeful celebration over white demographic decline. But strip away the provocation and you're left with the real question: can a country calmly watch its own demographic rebirth and call it evolution rather than catastrophe? Because that's the fundamental divide here, not about food, but about identity, continuity, and who decides what comes next. Now, you might be thinking this is all abstract, all theoretical, demographics, debates, statistics. But while Britain argues over identity and photographs, continental Europe is dealing with a crime wave that's hitting the green revolution where it hurts most. Operators of electric vehicle charging stations across Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Britain are reporting a surge in thefts of high-voltage cables. Each cable contains kilograms of copper and costs between 500 and 2,000 euros to replace. But when you factor in installation costs and downtime for the station, a single incident can run 5,000 to 8,000 euros or more. In some regions, operators are documenting hundreds of cases per year. What's particularly telling is that the same locations get hit repeatedly, which points clearly to organized groups, not opportunistic individuals. The industry is fighting back with cameras, sensors, and in some places, capsules containing dye that marks thieves and stolen equipment for tracking on the black market. But here's the human cost. Scroll through social media and you'll find stories from EV drivers who arrived at the only charging point in a small town, desperately needing to get home, only to find cables hanging in shredded pieces. This is what happens when high-minded policy meets low-level greed. The green transition, all those glossy promises about clean energy and sustainable transport, running headfirst into a pair of bolt cutters and a couple euros worth of copper. It's a perfect illustration of how vulnerable our new infrastructure really is. And if you think that's unsettling, wait until you hear what's happening 30,000 feet above your head. Airbus just announced one of the largest recalls in its history. Close to 6,000 aircraft in the A320 family, roughly half of the more than 11,000 currently in service worldwide, will require immediate software updates or rollbacks. The trigger was an incident on a JetBlue flight from Cancun to Newark. The plane suddenly lost altitude because intense solar radiation corrupted data in the ELAC unit, the system that controls the ailerons and elevator. Europe's aviation safety regulator, EASA, issued an emergency directive. Aircraft must install the fix or revert to previous software immediately or face restrictions up to and including being grounded. For passengers, this translates into thousands of potentially cancelled or delayed flights across the globe. But there's a bigger, more disturbing question lurking here. If a single solar flare can cause an onboard computer to malfunction mid-flight, just how reliable are the systems we trust every time we board a plane? We've built an aviation industry that moves billions of people annually, and it turns out that invisible radiation from the sun, something we have zero control over, can reach into the cockpit and start making decisions. Think about that for a second. The same sun that powers solar panels and gives us daylight can also scramble the brains of the machines we've entrusted with our lives. And the fix? A software patch, rushed out to airlines under emergency orders. It's a stark reminder that the higher we build our technological towers, the more fragile they become. But if solar flares are an act of nature, what happens when human beings decide to close the sky for political reasons? Somewhere south of all this, over the Caribbean, the sky is being closed not by engineers but by politicians. President Donald Trump declared that airspace over and around Venezuela should be considered shut down in its entirety, addressing not just airlines and pilots, but also, in his words, narcotics traffickers and human smugglers. The White House officially frames this as a campaign against transnational cartels, accusing Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro of involvement in the drug trade. Maduro, for his part, says this is regime change dressed up as a war on narcotics. What's undeniable is the military buildup. Since September, U.S. forces have conducted more than 20 strikes against suspected narcotics vessels in the region, with over 80 individuals reported as casualties. The Caribbean now hosts the world's largest carrier strike group. Officially, Washington doesn't control Venezuelan airspace, but it only takes one presidential tweet to make international airlines start rerouting flights, raising prices, and forcing investors to calculate a new geopolitical risk premium. Here's what's chilling about this. Venezuela's government might be corrupt, might be authoritarian, might be deeply involved in criminal enterprises, but the precedent being set is that a superpower can simply declare another country's airspace off limits and enforce it with carrier groups and military strikes, all without a formal declaration or international mandate. If that doesn't worry you, it should, because once that door is open, once airspace becomes just another tool of coercion, every flight becomes a geopolitical chess piece. So let's step back and look at what we've covered today. In Britain, a man's freedom hangs by the thread of a photograph and a demographic debate rages over who gets to call themselves a Londoner. Across Europe, criminals are literally cutting the cables that are supposed to power our green future. Above us, passenger jets are vulnerable to radiation we can't see or predict, and over Venezuela, political decisions are turning airspace into a weapon. You might be asking, what connects all of this? What's the thread? Here it is. Every single one of these stories is about invisible infrastructure. The digital networks that define what's acceptable speech, the demographic currents that reshape cities without referenda, the copper cables hidden inside charging stations, the software code running in aircraft computers, the airspace that exists only as lines on a map and in legal declarations. These are the new battlegrounds of the 21st century. Not trenches, not borders you can see, but systems you take for granted until someone or something disrupts them. We live in a world where a single photograph can trigger a police raid, where a city's entire ethnic composition can flip in 2 generations, where your ability to charge your car depends on whether organized crime has visited that location recently, where solar weather determines if your plane stays in the air, and where a president's proclamation can effectively ground an entire nation's airspace. The control mechanisms aren't visible. They're algorithmic, demographic, electromagnetic, geopolitical, and that makes them far more dangerous than anything you can see coming. The question isn't whether these systems will be contested. They already are. The question is who gets to control them and what rules, if any, will govern that control. Because right now, from the servers monitoring your social media posts, to the satellites beaming radiation through aircraft fuselages, to the naval groups patrolling international waters, we're all living inside infrastructure we don't control, don't fully understand, and in many cases aren't even aware exists. If you found this breakdown valuable, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you can, consider supporting our work financially. Independent journalism that connects these dots and refuses to pretend everything is fine, that takes time, research, and freedom from corporate pressure. Your support makes that possible. Drop a comment and let me know which of these stories disturbed you most. And remember, the borders of the 21st century aren't drawn on maps anymore. They're drawn in code, in cables, in demographics, and in the sky itself. The question is whether we'll notice before it's too late.